And we are live. It's just me right now. Kevin may or may not show up. Nicky's not coming. Tom's not coming. So it might just be me for tonight's episode of the Petty and Ill-Informed podcast. As I said, I'm just waiting for other people to join. Oh, heck of a day. So, as far as the internet goes, I ring up my internet service provider and they say, well, everything is definitely working. And I'm like, well, it's clearly not, because I keep getting knocked off every 5 minutes. And they were all, well, I think you'll find you're wrong. So after 24 hours, hi SoFlo, of arguing with them, I finally got them to check the tower for my connections. And wouldn't you know it, it's being the signal's being bounced off the wrong tower. And that was what was causing the problem. It's been fixed and I'm now back. Sorry that we couldn't do a show last night, but I'm here tonight. As I said, Kevin may or may not join. The topic tonight was going to be the orang pendek. It still might be the orang pendek. I can't see why it wouldn't be the orang pendek. Yeah, okay, we'll go with that. So for those of you who don't know, the orang pendek is a bipedal, said to be bipedal ape that lives in the Indonesian rainforest. It is described as like an orangutan, orange coloured, very small, like a swamp ape, a small bipedal ape man. And that's how they describe it in the stories. Now, I've always been a strong proponent of the orang pendek because, one, it's probably a misidentified species of orangutan, like the billy ape is of chimpanzee. You know, everyone said that was bipedal, but it just turned out to be an ordinary form of chimpanzee. Or, and when it was finally discovered, it was just, but they are pretty cool, billy apes. Very strong, powerful animals. They like a good rumble. And yeah, so in the Indonesian rainforest, I think it's completely possible that there is a hitherto undiscovered species of orangutan hanging around. And that's what the orang pendek is. And two, the second reason I believe it's possible is because it's hard enough to find, the animals exist in that particular neck of the woods. Hey, Doug, sorry there haven't been any cartoons this week. This weekend, I've just had incredible technical issues with my internet. I haven't been able to upload any. Yeah, who doesn't like a good rumble indeed? A space NG. The old billy ape likes a good rumble. They're the most aggressive of chimpanzee species, apparently. They have warrior tribes. I think that's pretty cool. Anyone that sees Dawn of the Planet of Apes knows what I'm talking about. That might happen one day. I mean, I don't think so. But, you never mind. Anyway, so yeah, the orang pendek. Like an orangutan, but bipedal. Stands on its hind legs, wanders around Indonesia. There's lots of cool sightings reports, including some very credible ones from naturalists that have gone in there and said they've seen it. As I said, though, I'm not sure I'm buying the bipedal thing. I think it's just a species of orangutan. There are plenty of orangutans in that area, in the Indonesian area. In fact, unless I'm very much mistaken, that's where Borneo is. So, yeah, there's probably an extant species of hitherto undiscovered orangutans living in the Indonesian rainforest. There's tigers in that forest as well, and people hardly ever see them. A tiger, they're a massive animal. And the only reason they know they're there is they see evidence, which, is a big thing against Bigfoot, because, a giant ape man would leave some kind of evidence behind, which is why I've just sort of soured on the whole idea of Bigfoot in these days and ages. And, yeah. Damn it, where's Kevin? Kevin makes this a lot easier, because, I've got someone to talk to when he's around. Well, he does most of the talking, to be fair. Oh, he's seen the message, so he might be hopping in. So yeah, if you believe in orang pendek, why don't you say something in the chat? If you don't, then I don't know what to tell you. Probably listening to the wrong podcast, honestly. Where is Adam Davis when we need him? I'd love to have him on the show, but yeah, he's a bit busy at the moment. Just because we're both British doesn't make us automatically friends. I have spoken to him though. You know, I wouldn't say we're best of buds, but we have been known to communicate with each other. Yeah. Oh, Kevin just messaged. Apparently, he'll be joining in a second. Cute. Oh, I just pressed something wrong there and opened up the whole thing. Yeah, thank you, A Space NG. I believe it's real as well, as I've said before. It's very difficult to find animals you know exist in that part of the world. It's Sumatra. Ooh, that's a cool word, isn't it? Sumatra. Ah, here he is. Hey, Kevin.
Hello. You already doing it?
Yeah, I didn't know if anyone else was going to join.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
So you
Nikki's busy.
Oh, you already did the the theme song and all that.
Yeah, I did. I definitely hummed an intro.
Yeah. Well. Okay. So you're already past the thing and into the talking about the Aaron Pendek.
Yeah, but you know, now you're here, we can go ahead and talk
banter
about
it up.
yeah, banter it up. It's a lot harder when you're by yourself to banter with yourself.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that. I imagine. So anything new since last week? Anything new that's getting on your mind and really bothering you? Anything grinding your gears?
Yes, there is. I don't want to sound like a complete nut job, but I'm having serious doubts about the veracity of the global pandemic.
All right. Yeah. So you're thinking at this point in time, it's not as bad as maybe they're trying to make it out to be?
A lot of my friends caught it, and most of them weren't even bedridden, and the ones that got it bad, you know, didn't even have to go to the hospital. They were just consigned to their bed for a couple of days.
Right.
And these are like really out of shape people.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to wonder, is it as bad as everyone's making out, or have they just used this as an? I believe the virus exists, but have they just used it as an opportunity?
Well, I think that I'm going to play this both ways, and I'm sure that a lot of people will say, "Oh, Kevin's sitting on the fence on this." I think that what happens is that whenever something new comes out, and you start to get information on it, it signs people will be overly maybe cautious about it because you can't seem to be not overly cautious about it. You know what I mean? You don't know how bad it is. You don't know what the repercussions are. You don't know anything about it. So I think in a lot of ways, people are just like, okay, could this be basically the flu 2.0 or 3.0? Or is this, some sort of mass extinction virus, right? Especially since, a lot of the people who were, at one point in time, who are now deniers of it, were at the same time saying that this was a weapons grade biohazard made in the Wuhan labs of thing as a biological weapon against humanity. We can't have it both ways. You know what I mean? You can't have it where it's this biological weapon that's designed by, a foreign communist government to basically strip us all out of our life and be nothing. So, we are living in a thing where I think that the numbers will project that a certain amount of people will die. I mean, whether that's 1% or not, I think it was a lot higher at 1% at one period of time where it was you could have figured 3%. 3% of the population would die. 1% of the population, I think, is where you're at right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the antivirals and the fact that if you get a vaccine on it lowers the chances of you getting a serious risk. But definitely, if you were a vulnerable person or the wrong person, that this was not good. And I think that a lot of times, and what we don't want to ever talk about, especially in America, is the racial implications of people having different things. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
if you're no, like if you were supposedly black or Hispanic in America, your chances of dying from it were considerably higher. Now, some people will say, was that a genetic issue or is that a socioeconomic issue? In other words, these are not well-served people of the healthcare community, which I suppose both could be true, but we don't really want to talk about that, do we? I mean,
Yeah.
I think if it's done anything, it showed us that if there were a real pandemic that was deadly, there's nothing. I mean, we're done. We're not going to get out of that. You know what I mean? Can you
Yeah.
imagine that even if it was as deadly as the plague, I think that we would have just as many people dying of bubonic plague now as there were in the Middle Ages, and it's just simply because of the fact that A, we live in a society where people don't trust the government, and B, at that point in time, we're not going to do anything about it. But I looked at it like this: at one point in time, Richard, I was all in on it. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, let's do this. Let's wash our hands. Let's wear our gloves. Let's have, wear our masks and all this other stuff. And that's simply because I don't think there was enough data not to do it. See, some people were motivated by the data. They would say, well, there's not enough data that's going to dictate to me that I should do it. Whereas I would say we don't know enough not to do it. You know what I mean? And I think at this, yeah, and I think it just depends on how you looked at it.
I'm still doing all that. I'm not advocating that you stop wearing a mask or washing your hands and whatnot. I'm just saying, I'm still doing all that, just in case, but I'm starting to wonder, you know what I mean? And like the fact that you can't trust the government, that you've got no idea how bad this thing really is, because there's always the chance the opposite is true as well. What if it's way, way worse than they've been saying?
Yeah.
I mean, those two go hand in hand. It could be easier, it could be worse, and
yeah,
I don't like the fact that we don't know.
Well, I've always looked at it like this from that standpoint. Somebody asked me the other day about, what it was like, to live in the Cold War. This came up from the Ukrainian thing, and the tensions with Russia and everything. And they asked me what it was like to live in the Cold War, and I said, well, it was okay for me because I lived next to a manufacturing plant in Washington State where they make planes. You know what I mean? So I knew I was going to die. You know what I mean? They dropped a nuke on that. That was it. And then they said, well, what about all these different things where you're supposed to duck and cover and everything like that? And I said, do you think that they would even really tell you that was going to happen? Most of the likelihood is that they're not. I mean, in my estimation is they wouldn't not tell the general population that we were under a nuclear attack. You know what I mean? They have the 15 minutes warning or whatever to know what's going on. But I think from their standpoint, they would say, let the rockets roll and then, we'll deal with it after the fact. But what's the point in having 7 minutes of sheer panic where these people are going around just basically making life worse for other people, the chaos of that. Whereas if you're just walking around and then the next thing you know, you're vaporized, at least you're not afraid. You know what I mean? You're going to die one way or the other. Well, what's the point in panicking people?
Yeah, I mean, like when I was a baby, my dad told me when he was living in Coventry that somebody accidentally tripped the nuclear alarm and he was woke up, but nobody else in the house was woken up. And apparently, when the alarm went off, he had 4 minutes before the new kit, and he said he just sat in bed and waited for it. Longest 4 minutes of his life, but what else could you do?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's my point in a nutshell. I mean, your father seemed like he was a reasonably put together guy. What if you weren't? I mean, what if at that point in time that you're just some guy who just says, "Okay, apocalypse now," and decides to get out you know, his gun and start. I always hated that neighbor. I'm going over and shooting him. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's would be a major thing, but at that point in time, people do. It's always interesting whenever you find out these you know these scenarios of like the day after and all these movies where people are like, okay, well, this is what's going on, or the grid goes down for a week and you don't know when it's coming back and what people would do and everything like that. you know it is, they say you're 3 meals, what is it, 3 meals away from chaos in society, and I
Well,
don't know. So you know
that is a saying. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't understand doomsday preppers at all while we're talking about this.
oh, you don't think so?
I don't get it. I don't understand why you'd want to outlive humanity. Like, just die with everyone else and just get it over with.
Right. What I think that a lot of these things just have sort of religious connotation to it. And I'm not going to say what religion or whatever, because I think that all religions
Oh no,
tend.
you've made a statement now. You've got to
Well,
take a stand.
well, no, all I'm saying is that a lot of religions, including Christianity,
That's
Islam.
it. Kevin's advocating for Judgment Day. You all heard it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. A lot of these people, I don't know if they really would, sometimes whenever you talk about Armageddon and, the rapture and everything like that, it seems like they're into it. You know what I mean? Like they're totally into it. And yet at the same time, it's like, okay, well, if you were into the rapture and you're a prepper, doesn't that sort of logically not make sense to you, Richard? Because you're
Hey,
automatically
wait
saying,
a bloody minute. You're right. A lot of these preppers are. So they're willingly admitting that they're going to be left behind when the
yeah,
rapture.
they're not good enough. They're willingly admitting that they're not good enough to get.
That's fair enough. I mean, at least they've got some honest self-reflection going on there.
Right. I mean, I've asked people about that, Rich. I've asked people about that, Richard, and I was not a popular guy after asking the question. I'm going to be honest with you. So what you're saying is, Mitt, you're not good enough to make it in. So what's the difference between me and you, really? Anyway, why are you trying to convert me?
Yeah, what's with the superior attitude if by your own admission you're stuck on Earth come the end of everything?
Exactly. That's the way I look at it. That's that's the way I look at it. Like I said, it's
Mm.
been one of those things where I've, you know, yeah, I mean, I was in a couple of when I was growing up. Of course, I was in some fire and brimstone sort of religions, and I'm not gonna, you know, gild the lily on it. It was like, yeah, you basically, here's your one shot. Don't break it. Don't do anything wrong. That's it. You know what I mean? And that's the way that goes. I mean, a lot of religions aren't like that. They're like, okay, well, yeah, you can ask for forgiveness, she'll give it to you. But
Yeah.
but I see what you're saying. But but the thing about prepping is that it's like anything. It's hijacked by people who have some kind of an idea about it. Now, everybody, in my opinion, should have. There's the old idea you should have 3 days worth of food, no matter what. Government says you should have the 3 days worth of food. I honestly think that the government should provide you with a packet that's like, okay, here's your 25, you know, shelf life food. Here's for 3 days and water and everything like that. Keep this in your house, right? Just give it to everybody. And That would be sort of the easiest way to do it. But I would still think that at that point in time, you should have a month's worth of, of food and at least a way to clean water in your house so that you could go ahead and live for 30 days. And anything after that, I mean,
But
you,
why?
because it might take, because if you look at it like this, right, there is, um, I believe, Richard, that there is a lot of hacking into the grid system of the United States, especially. Now, the power grid system in America is like put together with chewing gum and baling wire. And if anybody really, in my opinion, knew the state of how shitty it was, they would freak out. As a person who worked for a certain telephone company, I can tell you it is shit. You know what I mean? And I'm surprised, really, literally, that some of the telephones actually work. I mean, this is not talking about, you're not talking about cell phones and stuff like that. Although these things all have to use the same kind of transmit. I mean, it doesn't go from tower to tower to tower. It goes to the tower and then uses the infrastructure and then goes back up through the tower and then back to somebody's cell phone. So if you don't have sort of the correct fiber optics cables and everything like that, which is good because fiber optics cables can work underwater, copper wiring, not so much. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so a lot of times they don't realize that a lot of these transmission areas with the copper power is we're pumping air into them to dry that out because they sit in a lot of water. And once those things stop, it's over. So what I'm saying is there's enough hacking into the system where somebody like a Russian hacker could basically create chaos in America for a couple of weeks. My opinion, just by turning some switches. You know what I mean? And so that's what the problem is that we have done nothing to harden our infrastructure. Well, even if you look at it like that from that standpoint, if there's a solar flare event in America, it could basically take down the grid in a lot of places in America, and that would be it for weeks because they don't make parts of transmission towers and stuff like that in America. I mean, they don't make transformers in America anymore. You know, we'd have to get them from somewhere else. They don't make them here. And whenever you tell people that, then they start to get freaked out. They don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? But definitely, we should be hardening our infrastructure in America. But for some reason, that should be the easiest bill to pass. And it never happens. You know what I mean? Because people don't want to talk about it. They do not want to talk about it. But it seems to me like it would be, what's the point in having, and I think that the Russians are figuring this out. What's the point in having billions and trillions of dollars worth of weapons if the soldiers or the people or whatever don't have food or kind of any infrastructure to back that up? I mean, I'm glad that's true of the Russians, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But why would we want to take the same strat? Why would we want to take the same strat? That's just my opinion on that. So, I mean, I think that that's part of it. Knowing that, that's why a lot of preppers, and I know a lot of preppers, and I think that that's why they go overboard, because they're like, they kind of get into the paranoia state where it's so bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That they can't control themselves. However, but in a lot of ways, they're in my opinion seized by fear. You know, they get into the analysis paralysis, as they say, where basically they're so overwhelmed they can't do anything. You know what I mean? And I think that that's one of those things where you can't fall into that trap, or else you'd be like, why even get up this morning? The world is so shit. There's no reason to get up in the morning. You know what I mean? And you can't get into that, you know. because for some reason, you know, there's a little bit of joy in your world or whatever, and maybe you're part of making that joy. I mean, otherwise it doesn't make sense. I mean, there's how many billions of people on the planet?
A
But
few,
few
seven,
billion,
eight.
a few billion.
Yeah, a few really. There's a lot of us.
Yeah, but if I mean, if you ever were to go to like some place in like Butt Krakistan or whatever, and you see the way that these kids live or whatever, you'd be like, the world is, there's no point in the human race existing. You know what I mean? And I've seen stuff like that where it's just like, Jesus Christ. I mean, like I said, we don't know how lucky we are. I think in a lot of ways, it was just like being born in America was like winning the lottery, or Britain, or anywhere that's you know,
Any of the first world countries.
exactly, exactly, where you can regularly count on food and these types of things like that. I think it's a, I mean, it's really hard for uh for some people to hear, you know, people complaining in America about stuff, you know. Just, I mean, if the major thing is uh Will Smith hit uh you know, Chris Rock, or apparently Johnny Depp's wife like shit in the bed or something. Is that
I've
really?
not been following that at all. So.
Apparently she defecated in their marital bed, which is okay if you're into it. You know what I mean?
If that's your thing, then
Yeah,
fill your
I'm not
boots,
going to
man.
shame anybody. I'm just saying.
We don't kink shame, but no kink shame.
Well, it would be interesting to get Tom's view on that. I think he would have said, "Okay, right, let's move on at this point in time." Well. So yeah, no, that, I mean, I'm with you on this. I mean, but I think in a lot of ways, this is the BBC can be obviously very, very good. I think in a lot of ways of um, you see, to me, when I was growing up, the BBC was the gold standard of news. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah,
that you would think, okay, that was it. You heard it on the BBC, it's real. You know what I mean? This is it. And I think now at this point in time, they don't have that same reputation anymore about as being as sort of um, balanced. No, if you were from Northern Ireland and you were on the Republican side of the matter, you would have said BBC was always shite, because it seemed like they were always taking one side or the other. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
but who knows? Who knows, man? I mean, like I said, when I was growing up, and I tell this story because um, people always talk about, fake news and stuff like that. When I was growing up, because my uncle was involved in some cross community projects, and I was always up on the Springfield Road and those places in Belfast where the two communities met. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean? And your French camera crew showed up, and it was the middle of the '80s, I think. And they're like, nothing's going on, and they wanted something to happen, so they wanted to have footage, so they paid us money to throw bricks at this old abandoned building so that they could film it, like we were having a riot or something.
Hmm.
And so I mean, that's the way that a lot of that goes. And I'm saying that sometimes they create news, and I always thought to myself, well, that's because they're French. You know what I mean? And now I'm not sure if it's just because they're French or because they're in the media. You know what I mean? And that
No, it's
goes
because they're French. It's always because they're French.
well, it goes back to your original statement of, is it as bad as is it as bad as it looks? And
Being French, yes, it's
yeah,
worse than it looks.
well, poor old Frenchies. But it looks like they're going to have the same They're going to get macaroon back instead of Le Pen. So that's all right. Looks like we're not going to go into what fascism, like a new form of neo-Nazism. Is that what that Le Pen lady is? Supposedly like some super right-wing
Massive
candidate.
Nazi, yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do? I mean, vote for Trump, I guess.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I think we are we at the death of democracy? I think, that's an interesting point to make because it seems to me like a lot of times we are in an area of um, wanting authoritarianism, whether we want to or not. And I think it's funny that in America that we've convinced each other that authoritarianism, one way or the other, is freedom. You know what I mean? And it's very weird to me. You know what I mean? Whereas you can say, okay, well, I have the freedom to do this and do that, but no, you can't do this. I mean, I don't care what state you're in. In the last 8 years, there's something you can't do now, one way or the other, that you could do before. And I don't care if that's a liberal state or a conservative state or whatever. And if you're in that liberal state and you are a liberal, then you're saying, oh, that's great. Or if you're in that conservative state and you say that you're conservative, then you're saying, oh, that's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What happens is that nobody's realizing is that you're stripping rights away from people left, right, center, and everybody's happy about it. You know what I mean? Whether I agree with, certain things or not, doesn't mean I don't think they have the right to do it. And just because I wouldn't do it doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't have the right to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a tough one.
You're being very careful right now.
Who, me?
Yeah. You're
Well,
choosing your words with extreme care.
I think that you have to, in a way, right? Because I'm not the kind of person where it's easily defined as what I am, right? I'm a pretty conservative guy when it comes to social issues, right? So quintessentially, I would say I am opposed fundamentally, theoretically, to people having an abortion, for example. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't think that people should do it. Now, should they be able to do it? Do I understand the circumstances where they would want to do it, especially if they were, if they felt like they were raped or in a case of incest? Incest, absolutely, absolutely. I'm not into forcing those people or people who feel like it's, I don't think you should use it as some form of birth control. But I do understand how you could look at this and say, I'm 16 years old. This is not what I want. I don't want to carry this baby, and I don't want the shame of having, quote unquote, the shame of having a baby. And so I want to terminate it. No, I don't agree with that, but I think people should be able to do it. That's my point. So, a lot of people would say that I'm a bad guy, that I'm just as bad as those people who say that I shouldn't even contemplate the idea of what this girl or woman wants, which I think is just crazy. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's better than that than to take some kind of a herbal remedy or or go to some extreme, uh, sort of interventionist system that somebody's not in the medical field and tearing up people's uteruses and all that stuff. That's a nightmare. That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, abortion wasn't legal in Ireland. It just wasn't. But people
There's
still
a
got,
serial killer that killed women trying to get an abortion, wasn't
yeah. And but if you wanted an abortion, you could always go and get one. I mean, and now we're going to chase people around if you get one, and I can say this, right? Like it, if you're going to chase people out of the state and say, okay, you got one in another state, now we're going to take care of you when you come back. That's a totally different story, right? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, uh, and I can guarantee you that if some rich Republican donor's kid gets pregnant and wants to go out of the state and get an abortion and come back and not get in trouble, they won't. You know it, and I know it. So the problem is that a lot of people don't live by the, it's like it's all right for some. You know what I mean? It's all right for some, but not me. And that's the thing about it is, well, for me, it's all about fairness. If you could say that nobody was really going to get it, which I don't believe is true, that would be one thing, but it's not that situation. And I can guarantee you that. Anyway, I mean, well, that's it. That's it. On the same hand,
That's it.
I think that you should be able to own a machine gun. If you pass all the tests and put up.
So you're just a Republican then?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I don't know if I mean, I'm definitely not because I'm not a Trumper. That's for sure. You know what I
Those are
mean?
two odd, that's a separate thing.
Right. I mean, I am what you would call an old school Republican. I would guess
They
that
don't
would.
believe in abortion. Everyone's allowed a gun. How do you feel about gay marriage?
Yes, I think everybody should have the right to do that.
Oh,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look,
okay.
from a socialist, but you know what I'm saying is, here's the reason why I think people should be able to get married if they're gay, because there's advantages in law if you're married and you die, as far as you know, transferring your estate to somebody else. You should be able to transfer your estate to somebody else with the same advantages. You know what I'm saying? That, that
Yeah.
that's that, that's the way I look at it. You should not get an advantage in tax law for being straight married. Everybody should be able to get that advantage. And I mean, whenever I used to do estate planning for gay folks, that was the main thing we had to do, was try to, try to maneuver things around so that they would get somewhat very close to the same kind of arrangements that you had to, but you had to be really knowledgeable about tax code and loopholes and like life insurance and all these different things like that. And I think that most people don't have that knowledge. And so why should it be that certain people who have the advantage of being able to hire a financial advisor like I was get away with things that most people can't or don't know? You see what I'm saying? I'm very you know I think we live in an information premium world, and I think that a lot of times um, that informational disadvantage weighs heavily on the underrepresented and lower socioeconomic people. You see what I'm saying?
I
So,
do.
I mean, it's so if you're socially economically in a bad state, it's very, 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 very hard to get out of it. Whereas if you were up the ladder a little bit more, it would be quote unquote easier to do in a lot of ways. And that was one of the reasons that, it's there's systematic, whether you want to call it racism or whatever, there's systematic unfairness in America when it comes to socioeconomic groups. That's for sure. Whether that you want to break that down to racism or whatever like that, that's us for other people to decide, not for me to decide. But you can say that if you're a white guy that's poor in you know, West Virginia, living in the Appalachian hills, it sucks. And if you're a black guy living in, the inner cities of Chicago, it sucks. And how do you get out of that? You know what I mean? Both places probably are underserved in a lot of ways. I mean, whether the guy in Appalachia doesn't have, well, he's sure for hell sure not have an internet. Whether he has power to his electricity to his house is a totally other thing. But their kids are probably hungry, and in that case, neither one of their kids will have good economic outcomes because they live in food deserts or something like that where they're not getting the right kind of nutrition. So I think it's a poor people problem, not a
rich people problem.
well, no, not a racism problem so much. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, there are certain races that seem to have a heavier component of them that are in the lower socioeconomic group, and a lot of those have
Right.
to do with immigrants. You know, at this point in time, you would say, okay, at some point in time, those were Irish people. At some point in America, let's say that. At some point in time, those were Italian people. At some point in time, they were Hispanic people or Chinese people. And so you can't make it sort of a racist thing unless you want to start saying Irish people is a race or Italians are a race. We mean people hated Irish people. People hated Italians. And we consider ourselves to be white. Whether technically the KKK would they wouldn't consider us to be white because we're not Anglo-Saxon.
That's a bit dumb.
Huh?
I'm saying that's a bit dumb,
Well, yeah, I
Cool.
understand that, but that's what it was. The Norman Saxon way of looking at things were definitely the Celtic people were not considered white up until, I mean, the 20s. I would say the same for Italians. You know what I mean? They weren't considered to be white. And it's funny now, whenever you look at all these people that are in white supremacy movements, they're all called McBride. And, it's like, don't you understand history that 100 years ago you wouldn't have been able to get into this thing to keep people out of it? But they don't think about that,
Mm-hmm. They don't.
Well, how about this Aaron Pendek thing? We haven't really talked about anything to do with Bigfoot for a long, long time.
Yeah, we sort of avoided the subject. I think we got burnt out on it. That's what.
And do you think that the Aaron Pendek is a big? No, let's ask that question because I think it's important. Do you think that that's even a Bigfoot thing? Do you think that
I think
we should
it's
be talking about it as a scientific thing or a Bigfoot thing? Because I think a lot of times when we're looking at these types of things and we're talking about Bigfoot, we think, okay, Bigfoot in North America is kind of a joke. And it's funny whenever you look at that and you say, and I don't mean this against anybody who believes they've seen Bigfoot. I believe I've seen Bigfoot, but the circumstances behind the fame of a lot of people who claim to have seen Bigfoot and then the sensationalism behind that is sort of a joke. You know what I mean?
It's worth pointing out that you also think you saw a pterodactyl.
That is correct. I was, to be honest with you, I was reading an article yesterday, and it said that the big thing that they were questioning about it was whether pterodons, again, were large bird-like creatures or not. You know what I mean? Did they look sort of like what we imagine that they look like, or were they large feathered creatures? Because if it's just a big bird, then,
if it's just a big bird.
Well, if it is just a big bird, then maybe a lot of people are seeing it and they don't realize it. That's my point. How many people like you really know? Like, if you go out with me somewhere and I'm in the middle of the desert and sort of New Mexico or Arizona or something like that, and I look up and I see this big freaking bird, you might look at that and say, okay, that's some big vulture or something like that. That's some condor vulture of, you know, or I understand.
Arizona,
Yeah,
probably a turkey vulture. Yeah.
yeah, and then you can say that. But if it's me and I'm looking at the, if we're by Ship Rock on the Navajo reservation, and they've talked about this big, huge, monster bird that comes down and like picks up kids and takes them back to the top of Ship Rock and then throws them down onto the ground so their heads pop, you know what I mean? So that they can eat them. You go away with yourself. And at that point in time, how do you determine? No, if you're no, I'm just going to say it. And this is nothing against, Irish people or
Oh, this is going to be good.
no, this is nothing against Irish people, Native Americans, or anything like that. But I think that in a lot of ways, Richard, you have a tendency to see the world in multiple ways, right? There is the reality of it and the sort of spirituality part of it that comes into world. It bleeds into this world. You see what I'm saying? And so at a certain point in time, you can see things that nobody else will, that A will admit, they will admit that they saw, and B, if they see it, then to them that's a huge spiritual experience. It's like a vision quest, right? If you go on a vision quest and you see something after being out in the woods for 2 weeks and you haven't eaten right and you haven't done this and you haven't done that and you've been walking around and you have this sort of divine epiphany, is that epiphany coming from the fact that you are malnourished and sleep deprived? Are you hallucinating, or are you seeing what it is?
Well, yeah, but you're taking into account, you're missing a very important point there, aren't you?
What's that?
Reality is subjective.
Right. Well, that's what
So
I'm saying.
you might say, I'm having a spiritual experience, but I would say, I'm just malnourished and not getting enough sleep. And both realities are true in that person's mind.
Right. But that's what I'm trying to sort of get across, is that it is a matter of, in one person's thing, it's a like whenever you die, and
Yeah.
people who die and then they say, okay, I have gone towards the light, I've seen that. That's probably just your brain being so starved of oxygen that if you've ever stood up really, really fast or something like that, your eyes sort of go like that. Your vision narrows, everything turns to sort of white. It's like the loss of blood pressure in your brain and your eyes causes you to see everything to go gray. That's how that goes. And so some people could say, if you're an atheist, you'd say, okay, well, that's all it is. It's just a chemical reaction. Whereas other people are like, no, it's the most, beautiful experience I've ever had. And then I talked to these people, they said, go back, and everything else. No, I tend to want to believe that there is an afterlife. I tend to want to believe that you can see people from the past and spirits are around you and everything like that. I want to believe that. It gives me hope. It gives me reason to live. It gives me reason to think that, I'm going to see my loved ones again, whereas other people might not need that, or whatever, or they are sort of totally scientific and saying, well, I don't know what happens after life, but I don't think that I go and meet people. I mean, this is one of those things where this is it. A lot of people who say that are saying it because they're disgusted by the death industry. You see what I'm saying, Richard? Like,
Yeah.
if I were to die and my wife goes down to the local mortician, or whatever you call them, funeral maker or whatever, like um
Undertaker.
undertaker, they're put under a lot of pressure to do things, you know what I mean, at the worst part of their life, you know what I mean. And a lot of times people have not talked about this. And so they haven't said to their wife, this is what I want. And so you go down to you say, I'm burying my child or my wife or my husband or whatever. And they're saying, well, this is what they would have wanted. You know what I mean? They would have wanted this grand gesture and death and everything like that. And it's just true in history that a lot of people sort of bankrupt themselves trying to bury people in the grind. You know what I mean? And it's not really worth it in my estimation. You know what I mean? It's just like, you don't need any of that. But, to a lot of people it is. And so that's what I'm saying. Is it the fact that we hate the subject of Bigfoot? Or is it the fact that we hate the subject of death? Or is it the fact that we hate the business that's around it? The sort of just sheer jaded nature of people who use Bigfoot to make money. You know what I mean? And knowing that secretly they don't even believe it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, there are certain people, and I was talking to Richter about it the other day. I'm like, he was asking me about these people, and I said, well, I've been around those people. They're not interested in hearing about Bigfoot. If you have a story that you want to tell about Bigfoot or your sighting or whatever, they don't want to know. They don't want to know. They hang out with their friends at conferences and stuff like that. Then they look at you as the sweaty people. They're not going to mix with you, and they don't want to hear your story. Guarantee it. There are some exceptions. And then, like Dr. Meldrum, he's always wanted to hear my stories. You know what I mean? And then people will tell me, don't talk to him because he'll steal your information. You know what I mean? It's like he'll steal your information. Well, that's kind of why I was telling him the information, because I wanted him to know it. You know what I mean? So it's always hard.
So if they bring Monster Quest back and Jeff Meldrum gets up there during a Thunderbird special, and he's like, one time I saw a pterodactyl out Washington Way. I'll know exactly where he got that story.
Well, that's it. I mean, but you see, this is it. This is it. This is a thunder. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of people who have these Thunderbird stories, and they're becoming more and more prevalent.
Yes.
And so
an entire generation was raised on reality TV and therefore aspire to narcissism. So they make up stories for attention. That's the beginning and the end of it. If there were any large birds, they'd show up on radar.
Yeah, but then again, this is back to the original idea of would the government tell us there was large birds?
Well, damn, no, you've actually got me there. Fair enough. No, that's a good point.
Well, I mean,
why would the government cover up the existence of? Well, why? Yeah. I mean, the whole thing. Yeah. Okay.
Well, no, I'm just saying, there's lots of things that people don't know. You know what I mean? That's all I'm saying. It's not necessarily that the government won't tell you. It's just that, for example, there's a place around here where they have a sub. I don't know I don't even know what you would call it, but it's a radio station, and it's one of those things where they send the ultra low sonic signals to nuclear submarines, right? That's very close to here. I know where it is. And so they have this transmitting station where they use these super low frequency things to send it under the water so that nuclear submarines know what to do. They basically come up and they flash for a few seconds or whatever, get all the download, and then that's it. And then they send information back. I'm not sure how it all works. I'm not in the Navy, but anyway, it's not even really marked out as being that super sensitive. You know what I mean? It's sort of hidden in plain sight. It's just got a sign on it saying, stay out of here or whatever. And, it's not like, you would think it would be like Area 51. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, yeah, there's a 10-mile chain around this thing, and then this is it. No, it's just basically a chain link fence holding these people out in this area up at, in the base of the Cascade Mountains. And so
Hmm.
this is where that the transmitter is. Now, consequently, this is where a lot of people tell me that they see Bigfoot. You see what I'm saying? And so to me, it's always a question of are not that Bigfoot is attracted to the subsonic frequency, but what is important to me is are people reacting to this frequency change? And that's what's making them feel like there's an existence or a presence in the forest that isn't there per se. You know what I'm saying? So is it that just like they say that EMF can make you feel like, oh, okay, I'm seeing, feeling, hearing things. Um, can this frequency uh, be causing part of the problem? And is the Navy happy enough to let that happen? Because if you're in that neighborhood, if you're in that valley around there where people see that, both ways, and people say, oh, they seen this, is that easier just to say, well, you're just a nut, and then nobody checks it out, and nobody really knows what the consequences of this low frequency substation or transmission is to people or not? You know what I'm saying? That's the question that it is. Is it easier to let people believe in the idea to keep them away? Because I said that for a long time. If I had a still in the Appalachian Mountains, you bet your ass I believe in quote unquote Bigfoot. I'd be like, yeah, you don't want to go up in the woods there. That thing, there's a monster. It'll kill you. You don't want to do that, because I don't want anybody up there checking out my still. I don't want anybody up there checking out my weed plantation. I don't want anybody going out in the woods because, I'm doing something illicit in the woods. And I think that in a lot of ways, you know, that's it. That's it. Do I believe in Bigfoot? Yes, I do. But at the same time, I will say, uh, some of the things I may have seen or report or whatever, may be figments of, some kind of some extra external stimulus on my mind. I've always said that, but that's one of the things that I would say is that I've always told people I've got this medical problem. This is the medication I'm on. This is how hot it was. I've always tried to describe the situation in such great detail that somebody could look at it and say, "Oh, well, it's a reaction to this," or this at this altitude, people can start to be hypoxic, and people can start to see things. Like it's important to know you saw something at 10,000 feet and you live at sea level. That's important to know that. But these sorts of things are not included in any kind of Bigfoot reports. Where the people are. I mean, what temperature it was. I mean, it's really hard to figure out exactly where you're at. Anyway, that's my opinion.
That's your 2 cents on the thing, is it?
Yeah, basically.
Fair enough. Well, to answer your original question, I take a scientific view of the orang pendek. I believe it exists, but I think it's an undiscovered species of orangutan.
Right. Well, so you don't think that now let me go full sort of speculative scientist on you, because the little Homo floresiensis
Yeah.
supposedly lived up until about 14,000 years ago. That's what that. I mean, whenever they find the Homo floresiensis on the island of Flores, in the middle of the sort of strait between Indonesia and Australia, that causes a few problems. One of them is how would they get there 14,000 years ago? Because you would have had to have taken a boat. So that meant that they had some kind of intelligence to manipulate um, boats. And you didn't just get on a log and start floating over there and then all of a sudden have that many people to have a viable population. But I mean, I guess at this point in time we don't even know what the population is. um, the other thing would be is that it looks like they had evidence of language, of some kind of a language, from looking at their brain, and frontal lobe, and also the fact that they could have fire. Now, their brain's pan was very small. It was only like 400 cubic centimeters or something like that, but it had a very, very large frontal lobe on it. And so, uh, even though their brains were tiny in comparison to us, they seem to be able to do a lot of the same things that we could do. And then people will say, well, this is not something separate from us. This was basically, you know, some sort of, whenever they first found Homo floresiensis, the guy from Indonesia came, the head guy from Indonesia came and said, well, some hydrocephalic or some kind of a sick little kid that basically lived for a while and then died. It was in the normal um, bounds of variation in human uh, uh, the human species. And so they took the bones and took off with them. And they almost lost the bones. And you notice that it's interesting that governments tend to lose bones all the time. You know what I mean? And so it wasn't until the people who dug it up said, no, we want them back so that we can look at them, that they tried to get away with not giving them back and everything like that. They said, there's no point. There's nothing new here. Stop. You don't stop looking at it. It's not a big deal. And then they took it back, and then they had them go through a whole lot of scans on it. And they figured that it was a unique species based on the wrist bone. There was a couple of different things that were in the wrist of the little creature, the little being, that made it different from anything else. So they classify it as Homo floresiensis. But what's interesting about it is, to me, is there was an active government plot to cover it up, and that's one of those things where I think you're right in the fact that, no, also when you're looking at the people. Now, a lot of people use the term Ibu Gogo when they're talking about Sasquatch, but Sasquatch is not Ibu Gogo. Ibu Gogo are small hairy men who are not Sasquatch. You see what I'm saying? And so, small hairy men on the island of Flores, calling them Ibu Gogo, with a small primitive language, and then they would come down and steal kids and stuff and take them up in the woods. Now that fits with Homo floresiensis, because you're talking about that. Now, for some reason, we have turned that into some Bigfoot idea, and that's wrong. So I'm with you in the fact that upright man, because even doesn't orangutan mean something about like strange orange man or something like that? I mean, if you
Man
look
of
at
the
it,
woods, old man of the woods, old
yeah,
man of the forest. That's what orangutan means.
right. And I think you're right. But again, this is one of those things where I wouldn't be surprised if a full-fledged alternative to man, i.e., some kind of sort of derivative, obviously not Neanderthal, but maybe some kind of Denisovan hybrid comes out of the woods, and is basically like, okay, here you go. because I mean, there's huge amounts of jungle there and everything like that. The problem is as you go through it, um, you know, these forests are being cut down at a rate that I think a lot of times people it's inevitable at some point in time that it's going to happen. No, that's what people say about the Pacific Northwest. It's inevitable that we will find Bigfoot because there won't be any land left. But that being said, you know, we've got huge amount of national forests, you know, around here that take up 100,000s of acres of land, especially over the Cascade Mountains and up into Canada, and you know, 30. I think it's 30,000 acres on and the Olympic National Forest and things like that. So you're not going to cut down the forest there, I would imagine. I mean, unless something changes, you never know. But you know, it just seems to me like you're right. But the people have talked about that for a long, long time, and I don't think people have talked about Bigfoot uh, around here as much as we want to admit it, because a lot of times these stories of you know, that have been turned into stories of Sasquatch are about an ogress or a giant or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you look at some of the stories in native language prior to Bob Gimlin finding a Bigfoot, these are stories describing giants or ogres or something like that, not Bigfoot or Sasquatch in a way. And then after that, it becomes the idea of what it is, which again leads me to believe that Native Americans are just like, okay, well, if that's what you want to believe, we'll be fine for you to take it and run the wrong direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it is a sacred being to us, and therefore, if you're 100% wrong with it, we're not going to correct you, especially since you're not even going to ask us what we think about it anyway.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's one of the ways, I mean, as a person who taught on a reservation and speaks a native language, that's really how I look at it, you know. And you know, I get shit for that because I say that you know, maybe you should listen to a Native American once in a while about something, you know. And there are Native Americans that will talk about Bigfoot and all that stuff, and they'll lead you down the garden path because they, you know, and it's a funny thing. There's a native in Bigfoot, the Bigfoot world, who openly said at one point in time, "I'm just going to sort of fuck with white people," and yet that's forgotten about. And at this point in time, he's an expert on Bigfoot. So you get what you pay for, folks.
Well, that's quite a take, a hot take.
Well, you
But
know,
yeah,
it's hard whenever you're dealing with this kind of stuff because you know you don't want to say anything. I'm not native, so really, do I have the right to comment on it? All I can say is according to some other people, you know, this is not a popular cat. You know what I mean? But that,
yeah,
but that, you know, that doesn't mean that I'm right. Let's just put it that way. So that's why I'm saying I do have to be careful because to me, I'm just a white guy, and as far as I'm concerned, I might be taken down the garden path just because, you know, a lot of times, you know, a lot of Celtic mythology and native mythology meld together, and that's interesting how that is that you can take these stories from other places and bring them here and, you know, sort of make almost direct correlations to certain things, but it doesn't mean that my interpretations are correct. Let's just put it that way.
right.
I'm hedging my bets there. You see what I'm saying?
Just sitting on the fence.
Well, it's not a question of that because I mean, in a lot of ways, Richter is right when he says it's all belief based. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
understand what he's saying. The way that he then criticizes people for believing what they're believing is too harsh, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Because he then says everybody's a hoaxer in Bigfoot. You know, but again, this is not everybody. Not everybody who has seen a Bigfoot or believes in Bigfoot is in quote unquote Bigfoot. You know what I mean? And so that's where I sort of have always differed with him. I'm saying, people who are telling a story about what they've seen, Richter, are not necessarily hoaxers. They're just saying what they saw. And he just won't take it that way. But anyway, he's left the Bigfoot world now, apparently.
Good for him.
Yeah, because
He didn't seem very happy in it.
No, I don't think he was happy. I think it was completely. I think it completely used him up, and I think that in a lot of ways he thought that at a certain point in time he was just being used, and he was turning into this sort of hyper cynical person that I don't think anybody could deal with. You know what I mean? Certainly, it was hard for me to deal with him. And I mean, it's not it. I've gotten to know the guy offline. He's not the type of person that he projects himself to be in his videos. But then again, that's one of those things where when you use your real name to to act like a certain person in Bigfoot, then that's it. Is Cliff Barkman the person that he looks like on TV, or is Matt Moneymaker, or is Russ, what's his nuts? I can't even remember his name now, but yeah, is he that person? And I would say in a lot of reasons, no, you're not that person.
He has to be that person, or Bob Gimlin will eat him.
Well, but that's what I'm saying is that is Bob Gimlin the type of person that we all think he is?
No, he's a Bigfoot eater.
Yes, I know. He really is. He's all over the place eating people.
He's known for it. He's what they've got in Area 51. It's not a crashed alien spaceship. Bob Gimlin. Got him in a straight jacket and one of those Hannibal Lecter masks. And whenever there's a problem that needs covering up, they just unclip him, release him, and he eats it.
Yeah. So let's hope that he doesn't end up in Southeast Asia.
He'll eat the orang pendek.
No, people have talked about it, from that standpoint, and this is an interesting take on it. I would like to have known, and I tried to get a hold of Adam, but I couldn't get a hold of him. But I would like to know what people like Adam Davies would say about the fact that you take something that, and it's a funny thing is, why is that creature more of a credible thing than Bigfoot? It's interesting enough
because it's incredibly difficult to find the animals exist in the Sumatran forest.
Right.
Let alone the one they found new species there all the time. It's not unthinkable that there's another species of orangutan living there.
Right.
Which ultimately is what the orang pendek is.
Right. So what do you think? What if you were looking at it from that standpoint? What do you think? You think it's just a solitary sort of a being that's so it probably has some sort of family group that it lives with. But
if it is an orangutan, it'll be solitary, nomadic, and it'll breed. But they won't stay in groups. They'll be solitary.
Right. Which would fit. I don't know that much about orangutan, to be honest with you. I'm not that.
They're like the opposite of all other known ape species.
Yeah, which does fit the pattern, though, right? From that standpoint, where you look at it from the standpoint of describing it as, I've seen orangutans through documentary films and everything like that. And you would imagine, the way that they look like they go across, from tree to tree or hang on trees and things like that, is incredibly human-like, in a lot of ways. And you would say that that
They're the ones we've got the most genetic in common with.
right. And the hair on an orangutan is not necessarily very. It does look like human hair. It doesn't,
Mm.
it does look like a hairy person. Like with a gorilla, it's fully packed in. You know what I mean? And it looks like that's it. Whereas an orangutan seems to have sort of more straggly red hair, which would be interesting in the fact that in the right kind of sunlight, it would the red might actually bleach out, and it would look like a naked man in the trees. I mean,
It
that's
would.
yeah. So I could see how people would be like, well, this is like a creature. No, and again too. I mean, again, a lot of people in Southeast Asia are not very big physically as specimens, and
No.
so would an upright orangutan or something like that moving through the forest actually be taller than the actual sort of uh, Southeast Asian person? I would imagine it would be. You know what I mean? It's the same question that you have whenever they say that, okay, the there was red-headed giants in America, the red-headed giants of America, and these types of things. Well, if you really look at the idea that Vikings were very, very tall in comparison to other people in Europe, and if they would have come to America, and the average American Indian was 5'6". I mean, again, not a large people. They still are not very large people, depending on what tribe or whatever they're from. So if you look at somebody coming from Europe, being 6 foot, maybe 6'2", and then somebody being 5'6", would you not consider those to be red-headed giants? I mean, that's what that's sort of the simple route to say. I mean, let's not get stupid. Let's just look for the real answer. If they were here a thousand years ago, basically, why couldn't it be that these folks were just Scandinavians?
Makes perfect sense to me.
But we're still looking for red-headed sort of Bigfoot people on the East Coast. And there weren't red-headed giants out here. You know what I mean? There were just, like, this is the thing that you always come down to. Whenever you look at Bigfoot, there's three different distinct groups. There's the Bigfoot sort of Sasquatch people of the Pacific Northwest. There's the red-headed giants of the East Coast. And then there's the sort of southern sort of fouke monster, three-toed, whatever it is.
Then
Now,
you've got, Todd Standing's 4 or 5 Bigfoot.
yeah, but he just keeps those in his makeup closet.
Oof.
Well, come on.
No mercy for Standing.
I mean, I got to feel for the guy. I mean, again, and people say, well, why are you so hard on them? Why are you so hard on them? These people. And a lot of times it's like, well, you say you've seen Bigfoot, Kevin, so why are you hard on other people that say it? Listen, I've had everybody in the world be hard on me, right? Because it's my duty to prove it, right? And all I say in the end is this is what I believe I saw. I can't prove it, right? I've never said I can prove it. So that's the way that I think it is with other people. I mean, he's got a duty to prove it, not us. We don't have a duty to prove it. I'm not making the statement. You make the statement, you prove it. It's not one. It's not. That's how it works. It's not. It's not for me to disprove it. It's an idea of like whenever I was doing my thesis or my master's degree, I've got to come up with an idea and I've got to prove it. It's not for those people to disprove my theory.
Exactly.
But
The
that's
onus is on Todd Stanley.
exactly. And if you can't convince people to a certain degree, I mean, and scientifically, if you can't convince people scientifically that this is it, then it's not real. It's not real. And this is the thing that I think is funny with Bigfoot is that people will say, okay, well, I know it's real. Okay, well, that's great. You can know whatever you want to. But the problem is unless you can prove it to other people, the biggest skeptic, it's not technically real.
And that is a good stopping point. It's not technically real. Gonna have to agree with Kevin on that one. Until someone can prove it, it's not technically real. And that will wrap us up for this week. We will return next week, despite the hopes of many. Do you have anything you want to talk about next week?
No, I think it's other people's show to make something to come up with. I mean, I'm sure if it comes down to it, Richard, we can just BS like today.
Yeah, we're very good at BSing.
Yes.
So
some of our best shows are BS, and as a matter of fact, BS might stand for best show.
That's true. That's one interpretation of it. If no one else comes up with anything, we'll probably be talking about the Death Valley 49ers.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's good night from me, and it's good night from Kevin.
Cheerio.
Putin sucks.